going to get started. Can folks hear me? Hi. Okay, folks can grab their seats. Thank you. Oh, wow, that was like a very quick silence. Hi, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited for tonight. My name's Bina Ahmad. I'm a criminal defense attorney, public defender in Manhattan, also a proud member of Adalah-NY, the U.S. campaign for Palestinian rights. And we are so honored to have everybody here. I don't know how we got such giants in the room together on one panel, but I'm very happy that you guys are here to join us tonight. So first things first, just want to ask everyone to silence your phones. I know that's a bit of a stickler, but somebody's phone always goes off and it takes them 5 minutes to figure it. So just do me a favor, double check, make sure your phone is silenced. We're live streaming it, and we want to make sure everyone can hear everything these people have to say. So want to thank Verso Books for always giving us this beautiful space and hosting us. So thank you, Verso. And also thanking Adalah-NY for their constant and tireless organizing and for putting together this amazing event and for inviting me to be here to moderate. So with that, I want to just jump right in and start with first why today is significant. So today is actually, if people don't know, is the UN International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. And in honor of that, and as part of that commemoration, we want to urge people to get involved in BDS, so Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions against Israel, and specifically today around HP, or Hewlett-Packard. So Adalah-NY is a member organization of the global Boycott HP network. So in Palestine, if folks don't know, and I think a lot of this is on the Adalah literature as well, HP companies profit from Israeli apartheid by providing the technology used in the population registry that Israel uses to issue or deny Palestinians permits to cross checkpoints. And this technology and other security systems are installed in Israelis' prisons, police stations, and illegal settlements. So while Hewlett-Packard holds its corporate expo in Madrid today and tomorrow, the Boycott HP network is organizing actions against HP in observance of the UN Day of Solidarity. So HP is actually on their own, they're using the hashtag HPE Discover to promote their expo in Madrid today and tomorrow. So we are going to also use the hashtag HPE Discover to promote our campaign to boycott, for BDS to boycott Israel, and specifically HP. So we're using that hashtag to promote all of today and tomorrow's events, and especially tonight. So if folks are tweeting or doing some things on social media, use the hashtag HPE Discover so we can make sure they pay attention and hear us. So, and we will of course keep doing this until HP and all of the companies end their contracts that support racism and oppression worldwide, and they will remain a target of BDS. So this brings us to tonight and why we're here. So the title of the event is The Criminalization of Home from NYC to Palestine. And so, when we think of the concept of home, it can encompass many things depending on the political and the legal context. It can mean a place of safety, which many people, I think, sort of colloquially think of home as a place of comfort and safety, or it can be an occupied or criminalized space. So it can be a physical home, meaning you have a roof over your head, or it can be a community or our neighborhood, or even a country or nation state. So the impetus in bringing together this powerful group of activists and organizers is we want to think about Black and Palestinian solidarity within the context of home and what home means in these communities and how home is similarly criminalized for Black communities in New York City and for Palestinians in Palestine, or how home is occupied or surveilled, raided, or a place of detention. And we also want to look at the larger picture and the driving forces behind these concepts of home and how both communities are impacted by racialized state violence, both in occupied Palestine and in Black neighborhoods in New York City. And through collective punishment manifesting in evictions of Black people and Black families from public housing, if one member, say, is picked up for smoking weed, and then their entire family is at risk, and they're trapped in the criminal system, or raids by the NYPD or the FBI for alleged gang activity, or Palestinian families being evicted from their family homes by Israeli settlers or raided or destroyed by the Israeli army. and how this results in the expulsion of both peoples from their homes, their neighborhoods, and their communities. And we also want to analyze why these things happen, right? Because it's not just racism for racism's sake, just to be racist, but has a larger goal. It's a manner of dispossession, of land seizure, of wealth and resource monopoly, and a larger colonial project in both spaces. And finally, we hope to get into both, how both communities can learn from and support each other, and how these communities can and already do work to protect and defend themselves by themselves without turning to the same state that dispossesses them for help. And we also want to make sure that we're operating on an abolitionist platform, right, and rather than a reformist one. So, we also want to acknowledge that while we're having this conversation and we sit here tonight, that we are actually also sitting on stolen Lenape land. And that, of course, in this country, we're sitting on stolen land that many people don't want to acknowledge or really talk about anymore. In an incredibly wealthy and powerful city that was built on stolen land by people stolen from their homes and brought over to build on this stolen land. So we want to hold that and recognize that this is part of what we're talking about. So I now want to introduce our incredible panelists and read their bios, and then we'll go right into to their comments. So I'm going to first start with the woman in the middle, Darializa Avila-Chevalier. Darializa is an organizer with the New York City chapter of Black Youth Project 100, a member-based organization of radical 18 to 35-year-old people that work toward the liberation of Black people. BYP 100 works to center the most marginalized, which includes incarcerated people and trans and gender nonconforming people. Their work is done via direct action, political education, and internal leadership development. Their current long-term project is Campaign Home, Housing Over Monitoring and Evictions, which seeks to end the racist NYCHA policy of permanent exclusion, NYCHA being New York City Housing Authority. Before joining BYP 100, Darializa organized with Students for Justice in Palestine and helped launch the Columbia University Apartheid Divest campaign. So after Darializa, we have Mujahid Farid. Farid is the lead organizer of the Release Aging People in Prison campaign, or RAPP, which aims to decarcerate US prisons by accelerating the release rate of elderly people. Farid himself was confined for 33 years in New York State and released in 2011 after entering the system in 1978 and with a sentence of 15 years to life. While confined, Farid earned 4 college degrees, including 2 masters, and was part of a trio that created the first HIV/AIDS peer education program in New York State prisons, which later developed into the widely acclaimed Prisoners' AIDS Counseling and Education, or PACE program. In 2013, he was awarded an Open Society Soros Justice Fellowship, a joint New York State Legislative Commendation, and a Citizens Against Recidivism Incorporated Award for Social Activism. In 2016, RAPP was awarded the New York Nonprofit Media's Cause Award. And finally, we have Sahar Francis. Sahar has been the director of Addameer, Arabic for Conscience, a prisoner support and human rights advocacy organization since 2005, and has been a human rights legal advocate since 1994. She specializes in issues of Palestinian political prisoners, including ill treatment and torture, administrative detention, prison conditions, and prisoners' rights. She has extensive litigation experience in the Israeli military court system, as well as in Israeli civil courts. Please join me in welcoming our incredible panelists. And Darializa, I turn it over to you.
Hi, can you hear me? Oh. Hi, as Bina said, my name is Darializa. I'm an organizer with Black Youth Project 100, New York City chapter. And I wanted to start off with an anecdote from my time at Columbia, actually. While I was there, as Bina said, I was a member of Students for Justice in Palestine. And my senior year, we hosted 2 wonderful women from Palestine who came to speak to us on the Right to Education tour to talk about their experiences with education while living under occupation. Now, their presentation was wonderful, and I know that so many of us learned so much from them. But I was really fortunate to be able to spend some time with them after their presentation, and a few SJP members and I showed them around campus, and we were able to take them a little bit into Harlem and show them some of Harlem. And as we were walking towards Harlem on Amsterdam and 125th Street, there are the Grant houses. They asked me, what are these buildings? You know, they don't exactly look like the rest of Columbia's campus. And so I explained to them, you know, this is public housing, mostly low-income Black and Latinx people live here, and so on and so forth. But I also decided to bring up the fact of Columbia's role in displacing the people who live in Grant and Manhattanville houses. How Columbia's expansion into Harlem means that police push people out of their homes, so that housing projects like these can be privatized and make way for wealthier and whiter communities. And in response, one of these women said, that sounds exactly like what's happening in Palestine. All this to say that often when we look at our individual struggles, we talk about them as though they are completely separate beasts. But when we juxtapose these struggles, it becomes pretty clear that the ways in which we engage with state-sanctioned violence here in the US can't be contained in the domestic because our liberation can't be contained within borders. And it's either all of us or none of us. And that means ensuring that the struggles, that when we engage in our struggles, we continue to engage folks at the margins. And I wish I had known about permanent exclusion at the time. I would have loved to talk their ears off about it. Instead, I'll talk yours off. Our campaign, BYP's campaign, Campaign Home, or Housing Over Monitoring and Evictions, is a campaign to end New York City Housing Authority's policy of permanent exclusion, which applies to the over 600,000 New Yorkers who live in public housing, like the Grant and Manhattanville houses. Under this policy, NYCHA can permanently ban residents who have been arrested regardless of whether they've been convicted of any charges. And this means that they're not allowed to enter NYCHA property without putting their families at risk for eviction. Children as young as 16 can be permanently excluded from NYCHA. And because the policy is so vague and arbitrarily applied, it means that people arrested for minor infractions such as fare beating and marijuana possession are at risk for facing permanent exclusion. Even people who have been convicted of crimes, who have been quote unquote paid their debt to society, are permanently banned from NYCHA housing upon their release. This feeds into a vicious cycle of homelessness and incarceration that most wealthy and non-Black people never have to worry about. Because even if they are arrested or face incarceration, the likelihood of them having homes to return to upon their release is significantly higher than poor people of color. We chose to tackle the issue of permanent exclusion for many reasons. As folks who operate within the Black queer feminist lens, we know that the most marginalized should always be at the center of our work. And we see this as part of our ongoing work to end broken windows policing, which criminalizes poor communities of color for merely existing. Trying to get to work on time is an arrestable offense when you don't have $2.75. And it's no coincidence that over 92% of fare-beating arrests are of Black and brown New Yorkers. Broken windows policing specifically targets communities like ours to advance this notion that greater surveillance and intimidation means that our communities are somehow safer. That if you are tough on small crimes like fare beating or marijuana possession, then the rates of larger and more violent crimes will naturally go down. We know that's not the case, and it is simply a tool of mass incarceration and gentrification. And that's why it's important, that's why efforts such as those by the Coalition to End Broken Windows Policing are so important. Members of this coalition, including BYP 100, frequently do swipe it forward actions at subway stations across New York City so that poor folks can get to work without intimidation and harassment from NYPD. Because we know that for many poor people, interacting with police is not only anxiety-inducing, but can lead to so many different forms of violence, from use of physical force to arrest to a start of an eviction process. In the past, we've used swipe it forward actions to educate people not only on their rights as passengers on public transportation, but also on the issue of broken windows policing and how that is directly linked to issues of housing and displacement because of policies like permanent exclusion. People are shocked to learn that it's perfectly legal to offer a fellow New Yorker a swipe into the metro. They're even more shocked to learn the rates at which Black and brown people are disproportionately targeted for fare-beating arrests. So you can imagine how shocked they are to learn that policies like this can literally cost people their homes. Permanent exclusion serves to displace people from their communities, but NYCHA would have you believe that it's there to enforce community safety standards. It argues that ripping, quote unquote, dangerous individuals from their families and affordable housing is a much better alternative to breaking lease agreements with heads of households. Setting certain quote-unquote standards for determining who deserves access to affordable housing reinforces the idea that access to adequate housing is a privilege and not a basic right or necessity. Once someone has been evicted from their home, the remaining family members are forced to consent to random searches by NYPD in order to ensure that the evicted individual is no longer on the premises. Many times, families are forced to sign documents in which they consent to the permanent exclusion of their family members in ways that mirror how plea deals work. They don't have much of a choice in the matter and are often bogged down by so much legal jargon, it makes it difficult to know exactly what it is they're consenting to. This constant surveillance and intimidation does not create safety for people. In fact, the random searches that families dealing with permanent exclusion are facing are a small-scale version of the gang raids that NYPD has been conducting throughout NYCHA properties. These raids result in mass arrests of young people who live in public housing for simply associating with people suspected of gang activity. All of a sudden, interacting with folks with who you grew up with, either online or in person, is probable cause for arrest and for charges of conspiracy for gang activity. These raids have also caused people to lose their lives. Akai Gurley died in the hands of police officers who were patrolling public housing areas. Safety, to me, doesn't look like a 16-year-old getting pushed out onto the street to be exposed to vicious cycles of homelessness and incarceration and violence. Safety is not a system that encourages members of a community to live in fear of associating with one another in order to avoid that same system of incarceration and homelessness. This is not about safety. This is about pushing as many Black and Latinx folks out of the prime real estate that New York City developers are so desperate to get their hands on and into correctional facilities to be exploited. The fact that New York State does not allow for the use of private prisons does not mean that the state itself does not function as a corporation just as exploitative as CCA or G4S, because it very much does. NYCHA itself invests millions and millions of dollars on surveillance and policing every year to push this gentrification process. To give an example, as part of NYCHA's Next Generation redevelopment plan, over $100 million will go specifically to increasing exterior lighting, the number of cameras on NYCHA properties, and layered entrances on each of these properties. Personally, I think that money would be much better spent on recreational centers, on after-school programs, on repairs to the houses themselves, which many families complain are in shambles, especially because there has been no proven correlation between policing and decreased crime rates. What has been proven to create safer communities is access to education, to adequate housing, food and potable water, to proper medical attention, and to so many other social services. Policing and displacing people fosters violence, but we create real safety when we invest in people's futures. To me, the constant policing and surveillance that takes place for the purposes of gentrifying these predominantly and historically Black communities is not much different from Israeli policies that use incarceration and collective punishment to push Palestinians out of their homes to create Israeli settlements. And it's no secret that NYPD and the IDF frequently engage with one another to exchange tactics and technology for their respective projects. Jewish Voice for Peace recently launched their Deadly Exchange campaign to bring awareness to this and to end these exchanges. These state apparatuses are very much in cahoots, and that's why it's so important for us as the most impacted by this form of state violence to also be in cahoots. And to quote the 2015 Black Statement of Solidarity with Palestine, we must reject notions of security that make any of our groups unsafe and insist no one is free until all of us are.
I have so many questions already, but I'm going to let first Farid go and give us his thoughts. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Greetings, good evening. First, I'd like to say that I'm very honored to be here today to represent our group and to make the connection with others. What I intend to do is to connect our work, talk a bit about what RAPP represents, our work, to connect that work to the broader struggles, and eventually to take those connections and bring it home to the theme of this event tonight, criminalization of the home. And that may sound like a tall order, but I do intend to just focus on the essentials that I think will make those connections. Our campaign RAPP essentially is designed to deal with the issue of mass incarceration in the United States. Most of you have probably heard that there's a crisis going on in this country called mass incarceration. The fact that in the United States, this country holds about 5% of the world's population and actually confines about 25% of the people behind bars throughout the world. The United States actually has that distinction. Now, when you think about those statistics, immediately it should raise a red flag, and it should make you think about this country's claim of being the bastion of democracy, the beacon of democracy. It should make you question that. If this country is indeed such a great democracy and an example for the rest of the world, then why is such a large percentage of its population confined behind bars? Now that issue, that crisis, has become concern to some of the policymakers and power brokers in this country. They have indeed become concerned about this, so much so that they have come together from both sides of the aisle, the so-called right-wing policymakers and power brokers have come together with the so-called left wing, and they're trying to formulate ways to dig themselves out of this morass, this international embarrassment. They're trying to figure a way out because this tends to belittle their claim before the rest of the world of being this great democracy. So they're trying to figure a way out. But the problem that they have is they find it difficult getting away from their natural tendencies to punish. So when they formulate these remedies that they're trying to come up with to figure a way out, they're always excluding people. They make these false distinctions between the so-called violent and nonviolent, even though in this country, as we know, has inflicted more violence on the rest of the world than anybody that we can ever think of. One of the brothers said years ago that violence in America is as American as cherry pie. And, but they have this distinction where they decide that they want to afford a little bit of mercy towards people who are convicted or confined for minor offenses. What we argue in RAPP perhaps are things that people should never be confined for in the first instance. But they want to reduce their populations by focusing on these people, but the numbers belie them being able to have an impact by doing that, because the vast majority of most prison populations are classified as violent offenders. So they have a problem there. Now, what RAPP has done is try to frame itself as the voice of reason. We recognize that when somebody has an addiction, sometimes it's difficult to get them to kick cold turkey. That's too hard. So you have to give them, you have to wean them off of their drug. And what we have done is say that because you find it difficult to approach this population of so-called violent people, we're going to give you a population to start that process with that have been what we call duly punished, because the population that we focus on nowadays, we find many of them have been behind bars for 30 to 40 years. And so we're saying these are people that's been duly punished. You've gotten a pint of blood out of them, and all of the evidence says that these people are the lowest of risk to commit a crime upon release or to recidivate. So you need to focus on these people that you classify as violent offenders and start the process of letting people out in this class that you so abhor. we're having a struggle with this. And one of the reasons is that these policymakers find it very difficult to pull away from that, because what's been going on is most campaigns offer up sacrificial lambs. And for them to take the position that we offering them opens the door for them to admit that we are dealing with a broad social policy and not the individual infirmities of people, that we're dealing with a broad social policy. And so it's hard to pull them away from that, and they expect us to offer up sacrificial lambs. And the key to the RAPP campaign is that's something we won't do, because we recognize that when you research that whole concept of offering up sacrificial lambs, it implies that the people doing that are trying to atone for some type of sins. And we are saying, no, there's no sin on these individuals. We're dealing with a broad social policy, as I'm implicating, and the sin is on the policymakers. So there's no need to offer up sacrificial lamb. Now, on that note of us taking that position, that's what connects us to the broader struggles. This refusal to offer up sacrificial lambs. We recognize a connectedness to those that ordinarily we would expect to see as the others, and people that should be given up for our own sake. And that's something we won't do. As I said, we continue to lay the guilt totally at the doorstep of the oppressor. I recall Brother Malcolm, Haj Malik Shabazz, saying on one occasion when he was accused of teaching hate, he said that, well, what you see is the hate that hate produced. And so what I'm offering to you is that to the extent that anybody want to focus on crime at any level in our communities, what you see is the crime that crime produced. And we can never solve a broad social problem by focusing on individuals. That the only way to get at the root of what's going on here is to recognize the systemic problems going on, and these systemic problems we have identified as being applied to other struggles throughout the world. It's not just something going on here in the United States. These systemic problems are being applied to oppressed people all over the world. Now, I'm going to close by bringing this home to the idea of home. We understand also that the first step to a successful oppression or colonization is for the oppressed people to internalize that colonization as acceptable. And here in the United States, they try to get us to accept the criminalization of the masses. And we're saying, no, that's not a concept that's acceptable. The whole idea of a social problem, we recognize you can't look at individuals, that you have to look at systemic problems. And so, in conclusion, what I'm trying to point out is that what the colonizer goes after is the mind. My idea is that the home is the mind. And as long as we continue creating this mind meld and collecting and connecting the dots with our struggles, then the colonization will not be successful. That the home is the mind, and we have to avoid allowing the colonizer to criminalize our minds. Thank you.
That was incredibly powerful. And Sahar, we can't wait to hear from you now.
Okay, good evening, and really I'm so honored to be here today. And thanks a lot for all the organizers and all the friends that they supported to bring this together, because I think it's very, very interesting for me to be connecting the Palestinian cause to such a discussion. Actually, in Palestine, part of us, the Palestinians who were born and stayed in historic Palestine, I think we already normalized the colonization. We did in our daily life. Like when thinking about this issue of using the law in order to implement your policies of ethnic cleansing and mass incarceration and all the other phenomena of control for a whole society, it was used immediately after the establishment of the State of Israel by putting all the Palestinian people who remained and became citizens of the State of Israel under a military regime till actually 1966. My family used to get a military permit to go out from my village in the Lebanese border in order to go to visit my grandmother in Haifa city. So up till 1966, we were all living under this control of system of control. Later on, they implemented the same regime more or less in the occupied territories. Of course, it didn't ended up with these policies of movement restriction, but it's getting to the house, to the land, to the profession that you could study in the university. Some of the professions as Palestinians in Israel, we were not allowed until today. Even if we are allowed to study, we cannot work anywhere. Like some engineering stuff that is considered as a very security sensitive classification, we cannot attend because we know we will not find any. This is a kind of policy of restricting the whole society in the natural development of any society. I think there's lots of details, but I would be skipping, and forgive me because I think there's lots of things to discuss in relation to these ideas today. So think about the house and land problems in historic Palestine. The Israelis were using some part of the British Mandate laws and the Ottomanic laws in order to confiscate land and to issue policies that can fit their interest in kicking out the Palestinians and squeezing the Palestinians in their own villages. Since 48 till today, there's no one single Palestinian city or a Palestinian village that was built for we were 10%, 20%, we are still 20%, but we are more than 100, around 100,000. Now we're more than 1,200,000, and we are still living in the same communities, in the same villages. Of course, I'm sure some of you may heard about the problem of the Bedouin in the Negev desert. For example, the most powerful case of el-Hiran and the other village that was destroyed for the 120 times now, and the people rebuilt the village, and the Israelis comes and destruct the village because they claim that these villages, it's a village, one of 40 villages, that they are illegal. They are not recognized. Imagine 40 Palestinian villages are still there, but they are not recognized, which means they don't have schools, they don't have health insurance system, they don't get electricity, they don't get water from the state because they don't exist for the state. And el-Hiran, they wanted to enforce this community to go to live in Rahat, the big Bedouin city in the Negev, because they wanted to establish a settlement, an Israeli kibbutz called Hiran. And Adalah Legal Center was taking this case to the High Court, claiming why not reaching an agreement that the new Israeli Jewish community would take some part of the land, but they can live in the same place, and keep these 1,000 Bedouin people living in this village. The High Court in Israel said no. The Palestinian Bedouin village should be evacuated in order to have this new, because they claim when this Bedouin community were enforced to come to this piece of land, it was a land state, and they were not allowed. But you enforced them to leave the Jordanian valley around Jerusalem after the war in 48, and you made them moving to live there. Now you want to evacuate them, claiming that they controlled state land. Coming to the occupied territories, think about the 10 years of blockade on Gaza. If this is not a huge prison, imprisoning more than 2 million people for more than 10 years, and deciding how much calories each person can eat a day. You know that was published, that the Israeli authorities had a daily percentage of what's the minimum need of food that should enter Gaza so people can survive and not die. And not mentioning all the electricity and all the destruction that took place in the time of the war. Think about the checkpoint system and the bypass road that was developed from 93 immediately after the Oslo agreement in the occupied territory in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, how it separated East Jerusalem from the main cities in the West Bank, how it made the separation in between the cities with all these road systems and tunnels and bridges that the community cannot have a continuity in their daily life. The wall, it wasn't about the security. The main claim that we want to put this wall in order to stop all these suicide bombers and all the militant activity, but the main reason of the wall is controlling water resources and grabbing more and more Palestinian land. And whenever they faced a problem with the population, they circled some villages totally with the wall, with a gate. Like Tul Karem, Qalqilia is totally closed. A whole Palestinian town in the north near Jenin, they enter and go out and into their town by a checkpoint. And they close it. When they close it, that's it. The whole people cannot go out. And there's few other villages, like more than 4,000 Palestinians. Now they are locked between the green line, like the Israeli supposed to be border, and the wall. So imagine their daily life, like how they communicate with their families. In some time in the Second Intifada, they were not able to visit, like family members were not able to come to visit them unless if they have permits and to prove that they are your sister, your brother, they are a family member. Think about the health system and the educational system under such circumstances. When it comes for the mass incarceration, of course, this was the most effective tool for the occupiers to control the whole society. More than 750,000 Palestinians since 1967 till today, they were imprisoned. Currently, there's more than 6,000 Palestinians under detention. Detention was used in order to enforce political movement in Palestine. Think about arresting parliamentarians after the election of 2006, when Hamas won the election and composed the government. The Israelis paralyzed totally the parliament by arresting 48 parliamentarians, and since then the Palestinian parliament never convened. This is the way how they use the imprisonment. Hundreds of students are arrested every year in order to affect what's going on in the Palestinian universities. But still, they use the issue of housing and the protection of the concept of a home as a collective punishment and as an individual punishment. Individual punishment for the family that her house would be demolished because they didn't guarantee a permit from the Israeli authority, so they would be demolished. But as a collective punishment, when your son is involved in a militant activity or he got to be killed in this activity, so your house would be automatically demolished. So this is a punishment for the whole family that did nothing, and in most of the cases, the family wouldn't be involved in what the son was doing. Of course, there's all the policies related to the also evacuating and displacing whole communities in the Jordanian Valley in order to control the water resources and the agriculture. Like if you are aware about the landscape in the occupied territories, the Jordanian Valley is, it's the most important agriculture resource for us, for our sustainable livelihood. And this is why Israel wants to control it and wants to transfer the land to the Israeli settlements. So I think in Palestine, colonization and all the associated policies of the control and using the laws in order to justify these policies is very visible. So I think there's huge connections between these oppression policies that we should associate around and do mobilize around in order to face, because as you said, they are collaborating in training and trade, in all, they are building and developing these systems together. So this is why we need to face it together, whether on the grassroots level or on the legal level or in the international, like UN, different groups level. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't even know where to begin. I have so many questions. I have like 10 pages here, and I'm just going to start with the first one. I'm so moved by everything everyone said. I don't even feel like I can do it justice in asking these questions, but I'm going to try. So much of what everybody spoke about was about these similarities of, or I was hearing similarities between, what's happening to Black and brown communities in New York, whether it's mass incarceration or that results in housing evictions and, for small offenses like smoking weed in the stairwell, and then talking about the evictions and home demolitions of homes in Palestine. So, what sort of direct, concrete connections are you all seeing, whether it's ethnic cleansing or land annexation between the struggles that we're talking about, whether it's in New York City or Palestine? It feels like they all just work from the same playbook to me, but I want to hear from you all what connections you heard from each other that were really resonating with you. Anyone can start.
I think maybe one point that also can reflect on these connections that I didn't tackle on is the policy of house arrest that is imposed against Palestinian children. And mostly in the last 2 years, they were enforcing the family to move to another house out of their normal neighborhood in order to have the house arrest far from the neighbor, because they claim the child, if he's coming back to the same neighborhood, he would be throwing stones again. So this is the kind of policies in order to enforce people to think about moving out of their normal communities. So I think it's definitely on the level of ethnic cleansing, even if it's not so clear and direct ethnic cleansing policies, but at the end of the day, they are pressuring these communities, putting them in very harsh conditions, like how the mother would live in the house while the child is living in some other neighborhood. So, or the house arrest where you request the family to follow 24 hours that the child is fulfilling the house arrest. So one of the parents would be imprisoned under house arrest all the time that this child would be under house arrest. Which kind of life this? At the end, the family will decide to go out. So I think it's beyond just the imprisonment. They are using the imprisonment in order to cause this displacement and ethnic cleansing because they wanted to control the place. They want to control the territory.
And eventually just cleanse
Without
the land of
the people,
Palestinians, right?
of course.
And I mean, so what you're saying there resonates so much with, I think, what Darializa, you were talking about, in that because if children, are kicked out of NYC housing, or kicked out of the, not allowed to go back to their village or their home, like what happens to the families? I mean, do we see similarities and results with what happens with NYC housing when the children are banned from the property?
Right. I mean, we know in this country people don't see black children as children, and so I don't think people who are 16 and permanently excluded are really given much thought as to what actually happens to them once they've been permanently excluded. Sorry, one second. My head's in two different places right now. In response to your first question, where you were asking about these connections, something Sahar was saying about the collective punishment that occurs in Palestine. I see permanent exclusion as a form of collective punishment for these families. So if a child is arrested for smoking marijuana or a fare beating or whatever the incident might be, all of a sudden the entire family has to face, do we leave our home or do we leave our child? Like what is the consequence of this? In response to your other question, yeah, like I said, in this country, we don't really see black children as children. And we can, even looking at the example of Tamir Rice, who was killed for looking older than 12 years old, we're just not afforded, black children are just not afforded the sympathy. And even though like the law states that you might be a child under the age of 18, you're not treated as that. So really, like, I can't speak to what exactly happens when a child is evicted. Fortunately, I've never faced this issue personally, but I can speak to like the trends that happen. Since New York has cracked down on permanent exclusion, the rates of homelessness have increased over 40% in the past year alone. And it's also, I don't think it's a coincidence that most homeless shelter residents are Black and Latinx. About 90% actually are Black and Latino. And I think that speaks to the trends of the homelessness and the incarceration rates that policies like permanent exclusion promote.
Thank you. And I mean, Farid, so, taking off of what, everyone was saying, so, what is this in terms of not only people being, arrested and then are being like pushed out of housing, but, what does it do to the family structure then when someone's actually incarcerated? Like what happens to the family, whether that was the breadwinner or, that was, the child and other families trying to go upstate and visit them? I mean, what's the long-term impact that we see on these families when, their home is threatened and their family members in prison because of this system?
Yes. Let me try to put some perspective there. I think one of the things that we can recognize is that there's degrees of oppression. For instance, when we hear some of the examples of what's going on in Palestine, some of us may consider that harsher than what we see going on in nature. But we can identify that it's basically the same song, maybe a slighter degree, but the same song. And what I would suggest is that here in the United States, we see it come at us in multiple ways, in multiple degrees. For instance, I would argue that displacement, housing displacement, also occurs through gentrification, through economic methods, by moving people out that can't afford to live in certain areas. They use economic means in the United States to displace. And so when you think about those degrees of displacement, we can also look at what happens to people coming out of prison, the elderly, and the impact that displacement has on these people, on this population. Specifically, a large percentage of people have served so much time behind bars that they don't even have what's called a home to come out of prison to.
Right.
There's no home. There's no social system available for them that they can call a home. Maybe there may be some organizational resources that they may tap into, but that social capital that they could have used to talk about a home has been dissipated over the years. some people come out so old that they, everybody in the families have passed away over the years. And I think that's part of the plan, the grand scheme of mass incarceration. Part of that mass scheme of mass incarceration is to create this concept of homelessness and displacement.
Well, and so following up on that, so a lot of people who come out, if you have a record or certain convictions, you're not even eligible to be able to live in NYCHA housing, right? And so when they come home, I mean, essentially what, it's like a bus ticket and like $20 that they're given?
40 bucks.
40 bucks, and
In
that's
New
it.
York, 40 bucks.
And you don't get to, make a lot of money doing prison labor,
Right,
right?
right.
So it's not like you saved over the 20 years.
Absolutely.
So then what does that do when people are, especially if they're released to parole or probate, when they're, have to go out and sort of follow these rules? What's the result?
I would just suggest that it's even bigger than that. That is a problem. I don't take away from that, but it's bigger than that. And some of us have taken note lately that there's this thing called the 13th Amendment that has an impact on anybody that's been convicted of a crime.
Yep.
And once you have that conviction, this thing that slipped past us for many years, that was part of the scheme of the policymakers, had us thinking that slavery was abolished at some point, when that never happened, that slavery was only modified, and that anybody that gets a conviction nowadays is likely to suffer what they call collateral consequences. The inability to get a job, the inability to get housing, or the stifling of those abilities to get housing, jobs, and all of the other things that are necessary for a person's survival. So, yeah, it's coming out of prison after long terms, but the 13th Amendment says that you don't even have to go to prison. All you need to do is be convicted of a crime. And I'd like to point out, when I'm talking about that 13th Amendment, that they were so crafty in what they did that now it's even having an impact on a large amount of white folks that don't even realize that they are slaves.
Yeah, definitely we need to read that 13th Amendment. A lot of people are like, wait, what? So, well, I'll hand you my law books. So one more question I have. So then in regards to, I mean, I love RAPP's work so much in that, especially to try to at least like show like to appeal to the most basic humanity of people is that at least releasing our aging prisoners. But, what does that do in terms of when you take our elders away from these communities, right, into concept of home? Because many of us look at our elders as they're our history holders, right, and they're our teachers and our mentors, and sort of the ones that hold families together. And so, do you see impacts in terms of like what happens when our elders are, like our sort of the ones that are supposed to pass things on to the next generation are incarcerated and not allowed to return to their home, if it's a NYCHA home or some other kind of home? Do you have like stories about that, or just even like own ideas about what that does to families?
Yeah, the stories are numerous as to the negative impact of that. I can give you quite a few of those terrible stories. What happens to that community as a result of this policy of confining elderly people. And I want to point out, although we recognize that we're dealing with systemic problems, that we're dealing with problems that need to be solved with systemic solutions, that we don't negate the fact that at some level, people that commit crimes deserve punishment. That's not something that we are saying. But what we like to point out is that no other country, no other so-called civilized nation, democracy, Western democracy, punishes like what we see here in the United States. Right. You don't see people doing nowadays 40 years, 30 years, and that's considered a slap on the hand. That is no longer in a real extensive, long period of time. The person is elderly, that's not given consideration. A 20 to 30 year sentence is considered light. So us arguing to get these people out there that are now approaching 40 years, we still having a struggle with that. Although it should be considered a total catastrophe. That people we are really struggling to get out now, especially the political prisoners who the policymakers are hard. I call them I call these people the canaries in the coal mine, the people that were first used to start implementing these real harsh penalties.
Right.
They don't want to give up on that, even though these people have been in over 40 years. And so we having, a struggle to try to humanize that to the public and get this mass, critical mass of public outcry calling for these people's release.
Right. And so, especially we're talking about these legal systems, right? That obviously, and I'm a lawyer too, and I didn't go to law school because I like the law. I hate the law. I hate the entire system, and I want to dismantle it, and that's why I went to learn it. So I apologize on behalf of all lawyers, all a bunch of jerks. But speaking of the law, and Sahar, I wanted to ask you, and we're talking about, because you mentioned a lot of that, and I was writing and circling some just for thought later as well, that the law as a weapon, right? The law is not often used as a way to protect people or to bring so-called justice, and talking about the way that these military courts operate and using the laws to extend, going back to the British Mandate and beyond, to extend colonization. And so, what are there even legal justifications given for these, like house arrests or these evictions or home demolitions? And under what system are they given? Is it's Israeli military courts, and how does that operate? I know it's a big question.
It's much complicated because we have in one place more than one legal system. Like basically it's the Israeli civil system, it's the military court system, but still they use, as I said, the British regulations, the Ottomanic law when they need, and add on this what we get now with the Palestinian laws, with the Palestinian revolutionary law. So I would suggest not to enter in all this complicity of the legal systems in the occupied territories, but to focus on how they use it.
Right.
So, for example, in the issue of the life sentence, according to the Israeli law and the military orders, life sentence is open, is 99 years. And it's not limited with 40 years, 50 years. So, and when you are, even if you're released, like in 2011, 1,070 prisoners were released. Already 62 of them, they were rearrested. All of them, they got the remaining of the life sentences. One of them, Nail Barghouthi, he already spent 34 years when he was released. He was released for 2 years. Now he's back in life sentence. So there is no guarantee that whenever you're released, you cannot rearrested and facing again the same based on secret information. There's no need to prove that you committed a new crime under the Israeli system. When it comes for children, for example, how easy they can change the laws in order to exaggerate the punishments. So for example, on child cases after 2015, out of all these activities in East Jerusalem and in other cities, the stabbing and all these initiatives, the Israelis changed the Israeli criminal law. So before 2015, 2016, it was that anyone less than 14 years old, he wouldn't be imprisoned for custodial sentence, even if he committed the most serious crime, because he's less than 14. After the case of Ahmad Manasra, the Palestinian boy from Jerusalem, they changed the law, and now, based on 3 crimes, they can arrest even 12 years old boy, and they can hold him till he reach 14 in a closed center, but then they transfer him for the normal prison, and he could be sentenced for life sentence. And this is how easy they can change the laws whenever it needs in order to protect their own policies and their own interests at the end of the day. Legally, by using laws. This is how they justified demolishing al-Hiran by law and by court decisions. 3 times Adalah took this case to the High Court and failed in the High Court. Where else we can go? This is the maximum legal things that we can do under this system, but it's legal. It's according to the law.
Right, and so then it's okay, right? Because they say with legal, we felt, oh, we changed the law to accommodate what we want to do, which, of course we do here as well. And so when you're talking about children, especially the imprisonment and the targeting of children, and I think, we were talking before too about how a lot of this is, quote unquote security, right? Both in Palestine and in New York, right? Whether it's, well, these violent offenders is for security and safety looks like police patrolling your public housing building constantly, or like imprisoning a 12-year-old. I mean, can you give us an example, Sahar, for a case, like some of the prosecutions that have been, I mean, all of them are egregious, but some like particularly egregious example where, they'll say it's for security, but it's for, I think it was like driving on a settler road or something, like some cases that you have defended.
Yes, of course. You should know that the military court system in the occupied territories is not just implemented in the most serious security cases that the international law asks for. No, Israel since 1967 expanded the jurisdiction of these military courts to include all different kinds of usual criminal cases, definitely like traffic cases, and of course all these laborers that they enter Israel in order to work, but they couldn't guarantee a permit. So if they would be arrested, they would be prosecuted in the military court. So the military court, definitely now in the last 5 years, the percent of the security cases in front of these courts are the minimum. The majority of the cases, out of 3,000 cases every year, more than 2,000 are related to labor things, traffic issues, and regular, if not more than that. So it's not about security, it's about control. Just giving you a figure about how much money they collect in this system every year because in each element of the sentence, beside the imprisonment, there's always a fine of $200, $300, $500, $1,000. Every year they collect like 14 million shekels. How much they would be? $4 million, something like that. When we referred a question via Amira Has, the Israeli journalist, for the spokesperson of the army, where you use this money, they claimed in the infrastructure in the occupied territories. Tell me if they constructed a new way or road for any Palestinian village. Of course, it's used in the settlements. This is the economical exploitation of the legal system for the Palestinian prisoners, not mentioning the fines inside the prison system itself. Like Addameer issued lately a report about the economical exploitation of the Palestinian prisoners, how much the system caused them to spend their money in the system by buying from the prison canteen and so on.
And that's so similar to our system, as many people don't know. When you take a plea in New York, for instance, even if it's to a non-criminal charge, you still have to pay a surcharge, right? Or restitution or a fine. And so, I mean, I think just in our sort of vehicular crimes unit that collected several $1 million, as people who are just driving with a suspended license or whatnot, that money doesn't go back, as we know, to NYC housing or to any other kind of services. And so, especially when you're talking about the military courts, and a lot of this is done by the military and military weapons and strategy, and especially we mentioned the incredible campaign the JVP is working on, Deadly Exchange, looking at the way these military strategies are shared, both with local law enforcement here in the Israeli army. Darializa, I wanted to ask you, just, you talked a lot about NYPD, going through public housing and these gang raids and whatnot. Are we seeing, particularly with the gang raids, are we seeing these sort of military surveillance strategies or weapons or whatnot in the way that housing is patrolled and policed in New York? Have you seen that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I think the Bronx 120 is a perfect example of this. In April of last year, of 2016, the largest gang raid that has happened in New York City happened in the Bronx, and 120 people were indicted for charges of conspiracy. And during this raid, what happened, it was very early morning. I believe it was about 5:30 in the morning. NYPD comes into these housing projects using flash grenades to disorient people, carrying assault rifles with NYPD helicopters over the projects, just making mass arrests. And can you just imagine the fear that induces in families who don't know what's going on, don't know why people are being arrested, don't know why there's police all of a sudden at 5 in the morning in your home. But, you know, like the surveillance that has happened that led to that specific raid had been happening for years, since some of these charges were put together as early as like 2007. And it just goes to show how in NYCHA, like the surveillance that they invest in these communities, like they have mobile command centers, what they call mobile command centers, which is the mobile police stations just right outside of most NYCHA houses. You know, they conduct vertical sweeps of the buildings.
And can you explain a little bit what vertical sweeps are for folks?
It's just basically like the raid. They just go through, go up and down the houses to see if anyone's like in the building who's not supposed to be there, who's trespassing. There are certain hours that people who that people can go in to make sure that people who haven't been permanently excluded aren't in the home. And you know, these are just more tactics that surveillance tactics that NYPD and NYCHA use to surveil people, get them arrested, and yeah.
Oh, and so in these gang raids were all in public housing, right? They were all people in public housing, and a lot of them. So a lot of people may not realize, especially for federal conspiracy, it's extremely easy, right, to charge them with federal conspiracy. And a lot of people were just friends with other people in the housing project, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, so for the raids of the Manhattanville and Grant houses that happened a few years back, I think there were 103 people charged with conspiracy in those issues. But most of those charges were entirely based on social interactions with people who have just grown up with each other, having normal interactions. Like, if I grew up next to you and I've seen you like every day of my life for the past 24 years, of course I'm going to say hello to you, you know? Or for like having pride in the projects that they come from, all of a sudden that's considered, you know, conspiracy for gang activity.
Or even using like social media pictures,
social media
right,
pictures,
just together,
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's incredibly disturbing. I don't think people realize that the federal conspiracy is so easy. And do we know any sort of impact? Of course, there is an impact. So like what's happening with the families now because they're still being prosecuted. Their prosecutions are done. I don't know if everyone's taken a plea. I think some people have, but do we know sort of what's happening with those families now of the NYCHA housing gang raids?
I mean, I personally don't know individually like what's happening to each of these families, but I know that a lot of them are facing issues now with their housing because their children have been evicted from their homes, and that means that they now have issues with their own housing.
And that's without a conviction.
And that's
right?
without a conviction, because all of a sudden their children are in violation of their tenancy, and so it's considered like a broken contract with your lease, and so that's the legal justification for evicting people from their homes because of this. And since it's conspiracy for gang activity, they're considered dangerous criminals for posting pictures on Facebook with their friends, you know?
It's incredibly infuriating. So much of what everybody here has said is so infuriating, and I want to talk all night about it, so let's hang out after as well. But, so I could just sit here and just talk with you guys, but I want to also give our audience a chance to ask some questions. We do want to end by 9, but so I will politely ask people to ask a question, not make a statement, keep it. And as you notice, I have been timing everybody. I'm a lawyer in a lot of ways. I have all these papers and notes. I know, but I will time you like 30 seconds so we can make sure we get people who want to ask questions in. We'll take a couple of questions at a time. If folks want to ask them, do we have mics? I think we have. Okay, so if you want to just go over, if you're physically able, if you want to go over to the mic, if you're physically able to access it, otherwise I think we can come around. So we'll take like 3 at a time.
Hey, how you doing, everyone? Good evening. I want to first thank them. First of all, my name is Sekou Kamathi. I'm originally from Atlanta. I'm new to New York, so please excuse me. But my question, first and foremost, as it relates to the BYP sisters, as it relates to housing in New York City, it's really insane trying to find like housing here in the city of New York. And you also mentioned about the public transit. Well, it seems like, what if it was like a culture of like this? For me, instance, I spent 2 weeks here with no Metro card, jumping the turnstiles or like simply asking people to swipe me in.
Okay, you're about 30 seconds, so you can
whatever.
Wrap up to the question.
What do you feel about, like you said, this like direct action as it relates to just simply bypassing that? Because it's not against the law to ask people to swipe, or it's decriminalized even to jump the turnstiles. So what do you think of that?
Sorry, can I just clarify?
Somebody else have a question?
Yeah,
Okay, and we'll take 2 more questions and then.
Mine's a short question, but I bet it's a long answer. You had mentioned framing this conversation within the context of abolition. And so I wanted to ask, what does abolition look like, whether it's in regards to the prison system or the acquisition of land that was stolen?
Thank you.
Hi. My question is about the housing. So there's NYCHA and there's the federally funded housing as well. So do they have this, operate under the same system? And what about privacy? I mean, they're checking social media and maybe your family, you just know people who may have been arrested, and they're visiting, and you happen to be in one of their photos on Facebook.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Okay, so
question.
what about privacy? Just simple privacy. How can they invade your privacy?
Okay, so the first question was about sort of just direct action, just like jumping the turnstile, asking for a swipe, and the second was about what does abolition look like. And the third is about privacy and sort of federal funds into housing. So for the first question, did you want me just to ask the legal part of it, the jump in the turnstile? So, and again, just sorry to be the lawyer, I'm just going to embarrass myself. So it's still a Class A misdemeanor to jump the turnstile or to, go through the exit gate, even though they're not technically supposed to put you through the system or ask for a criminal plea at arraignment. If you have a record, they will ask you to plead to that charge. And asking for a swipe is a crime, but offering a swipe is not. So if someone's hanging out outside the turnstile, if they go like this, usually that's the motion, like, can you swipe me in? That can be a crime for them. But if you see someone just hanging out outside the turnstile and you can say, oh, do you want to swipe? And they say yes, that's okay. Totally confusing, and the law, of course, as we said, does not make any sense. It is not about justice. So, but I just want to add that part. So anyone want to take the first or any of the questions, and 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah, so I mean, just speaking more on the issue of the Metro cards and turnstile jumping, I personally have an unlimited Metro card, so whenever I'm leaving a station, I always scan to make sure there's no one outside standing. And if I do see someone just standing around, I ask, do you need a swipe? Sometimes they don't, and you just say, okay, cool, just keep moving. Oftentimes they do. I just swipe them in, it's not a big deal. My favorite is when there's police, because then I can just look at them in the eye and swipe them in.
With a smile.
With a smile, because it's perfectly legal, and there's nothing they can do about it. But if more New Yorkers knew that, it doesn't cost me anything to swipe someone in. I've already paid my Metro card; it's an unlimited. If more New Yorkers knew about that, they would do it. I feel like New Yorkers aren't terrible people, like, as much as people like to claim that we are. We're not, and so it costs so much more to incarcerate people for fare beating than it does to just give every single New Yorker a Metro card. It would be so much cheaper to just give people access to the Metro than it would be to incarcerate them.
Especially to a broken system, as I'm sure we've all.
That doesn't even get us to work on time, so.
What about, does anyone else want to answer the first question, or what about abolition or sort of the right to privacy in these housing projects? Anyone answer about abolition? What does it look? It's a big open-ended question, but.
No, I'll say a word about it. For me, to get at the heart of abolition, we got to go back to the original abolition movement, which was trying to abolish slavery. And as I mentioned earlier, that was never really accomplished. So I think we need to put that back on the table, this thing about the 13th Amendment, if we're going to talk about abolition. Then, even if we considered restoring everyone to their full rights and capacities, I think a whole lot of other issues is going to come into play to make abolition real. We're going to have to talk about things such as reparations, et cetera, because a lot of people were diminished as a result of these last 400 to 500 years of living in second-class citizen state and need to be restored. So there's a whole lot of other issues that have to be addressed with when we start talking about real abolition and to make it real and to make it substantial. That's my take on that.
Sahar, do you want to answer?
So yeah, I totally agree that we should deal with the root cause of the problem, which in our context is the colonization. So ending the colonization will end all these imprisonment and all these policies. So we don't need rehabilitation, or we need to end the Israeli colonization of Palestine.
Right, exactly. Thank you. Does anyone want to tackle right to privacy within these? I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts on that.
We live in a surveillance state. We live in a surveillance state. I don't know how much privacy any of us have. I don't think that NYPD is necessarily looking to protect our rights to privacy. They're definitely not looking to protect Muslims' rights to privacy in this country. They're not looking to protect the right to privacy for Black people or other people of color in this country. It's just one of the many rights that we are not afforded.
Right. It's getting very whittled down, so be careful what you put in text and email. It can be subpoenaed. What was this phrase, like email, like it could be read in your deposition one day? Like, you know, dance like nobody's looking and laugh. Email like it will be read out loud at your deposition one day, for real. So I think we have time for the quick 3 more questions. I'm going to time people again because I'm annoying, but I love you all. And then we'll wrap up. And we're going to ask, I have one closing thing, but yes. So I think with people at the mics are...
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful panel. I'm from a part of London where the fire that happened this summer killed over 150 people. And that was caused by cladding that was meant to beautify this building and caught fire from the outside and trapped these people in a burning building. But the thing that was most interesting about it is the government then said this is why we need to abolish council housing in that part of London, which is prime real estate. And a lot of the residents were saying, no, actually we just need better fire security regulations and that kind of thing. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the resistance that inhabitants of projects or housing estates or affordable housing or whatever government-led systems are there for people to live in affordable accommodation. What form of resistance is there?
30 seconds now.
All right.
All right, you want to take 2 more?
We got a lot of questions. My question's about RAPP. I was wondering, what are the strategies that you use to actually get folks out of prison, whether it's litigation or lobbying officials or public advocacy?
I love that sarcastic. All right, one more.
Hi, thank you guys so much for the panel. We were talking about how law and oftentimes bureaucratic institutions are used as instruments in forms of oppression, and I wanted to think about, kind of get insight from our panelists, how we can combine advocacy and activism and bring that into these spaces to kind of push away the trend of using, healthcare institutions, lawyers, public defenders as a way to,
Definitely.
push against that sort of suppression of poor Black and brown communities in the U.S.
All right, so the first question is about sort of using example of the horrific fire in London projects and saying that was why we should get rid of projects and resistance in housing. And then the second was to RAPP specifically, but how, as you chuckle, how you get folks out of prison. The third was just sort of, I guess, summarizing how do we move beyond just going to like lawyers or whatnot and do more combination of activism and advocacy in a creative way, if that's a good way to summarize it, I hope. Does anyone want to take any of them, or we can go in order?
Maybe I can take the last one.
Sure.
I think on the level of advocacy, definitely there's a space for both, like what we can do via the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign to like pick a company or a group that we think that is involved in these violations back in Palestine and here in the United States, and to go against in order to enforce them to change their policies. And under the PDS itself, I think there's lots of things to be done, like especially we're sometimes more focusing on the boycott or the divestment, but I think it's also the time to raise our voices as more professional people, as lawyers, as activists on the level of accountability, what it means, the accountability. The responsibility is not just of these organizations or corporations that they are involved. The responsibilities of the states according to the agreements that they are signed to in the international level. They have to find these entities accountable in their own countries and to guarantee that any US company or any British company is not involved. It's the responsibility of the UK and the United States. It's not the responsibility of the people. So I think this is how we should take it further in our advocacy. And of course, there's always as well the more professional kind of work with the legislators, with the Congress people, with like different stakeholders and decision making through specific campaigns, like, for example, No Way to Treat a Child, and the new bill that was submitted last week on the issue of aid and funding to Israel in order to be controlled that it's not used in arresting and violating these children's rights. So such things, I think this is the way how to start to build these solidarity campaigns together.
It's beautiful. Anyone else want to take one of the other questions?
Yeah, so in response to the question about resistance from residents of NYCHA or other people doing the work to combat gentrification of NYCHA, there are so many organizations I could name. The two that are at the forefront of my mind are the Stop the Raids Coalition, which are working to end raids like the one that happened in the Bronx with the Bronx 120, or the ones in the Grantham and Hannahville houses. And you know, they work with the victims of those raids. They provide legal support and so many other resources for the families who have been affected by these raids. Then there's, for example, the Red Hook Initiative in Brooklyn that works with the Red Hook houses in Brooklyn, and they combat so many other forms of issues within NYCHA housing in Brooklyn. So yeah, it's not, people don't just complacently live under these conditions. They realize that living in NYCHA housing is not a walk in the park, you know. And you know, BYP 100, not all of our members live in NYCHA housing, but we recognize that it's incredibly important for people who do live in NYCHA housing to be at the forefront of this. This is their, like, these are their homes. So yeah, we like, for example, right now we're currently base building with NYCHA residents to expand the impact. So yeah, I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question, but.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. And Farid, did you want to answer about RAPP and how you get folks out of prison?
Our strategies have been multifaceted, and I would say the most fundamental one, although many of them have been effective for us, but the most fundamental one is our community organizing, our community education and community organizing. What we learned when we first launched our campaign, first of all, we looked back at a lot of the efforts that had taken place prior to us launching our campaign, and we asked ourselves what were some of the mistakes made in the past and what were some of the things we needed to correct. And what we've discovered was that many of the campaigns that preceded us tried to get legislation passed without sufficiently engaging the public, educating the public on the issues and engaging them on these issues. So we said that one of the things we need to do is to create a critical mass in the public calling for change. Now that education aspect is not just with the public. We also engaged in educating our legislators. In the last 6 months, we were successful in getting new commissioners appointed to the parole board and old commissioners taken off simply because we compiled research on these people, something that had never been done in the past. They used to fly through the confirmation process because the people that were responsible for confirming them didn't know anything about them. So we went and gathered all of their past hearings, gleaned information from their records, and showed the worst of them, what was going on. And we had some of our representatives from our community that had the ammunition they needed to go at these people. And so education is very important. And then we found that one of the other things that is very helpful in getting change implemented is if you can get a robust media strategy going. And we've been successful in doing that pretty much. We don't had articles published in most of the major media throughout the country, putting the spotlight on these issues. The spotlight helps. What's been going on in the past has been an abusive process, and they've been able to get away with it because they've been operating in the dark. And when you get that spotlight on them to show exactly what's going on, what they've been doing, then they start scurrying like roaches.
It's an incredible way to scurry like roaches. So unfortunately, we are at time, but I know everyone's already starting to pack up, so hold still for a second. So as people are leaving, we would love to accept donations if people can give and would be able to give at the door. So donations will cover costs for tonight, but anything extra will go to one of these three incredible organizations, BYP, or all three, obviously divided amongst all three, to BYP 100, to Addameer, and to RAPP. They're doing incredible work, if you guys all see, and if you support this work, and if you've been as inspired, and my heart is like pumping, I have so many more ideas and questions, then please, if you can give, please do. If everyone, when you're getting up, fold up your chair, and I guess the other folks will show you where to put it so we can collectively clean up so that it's all about the collective. And just, join me, please, one more time in thanking our panelists. I am so incredibly moved by everything they said tonight. Thank you.